can use that in a lot of ways. So what I say to people is, sure, you know, look at your values when you were really angry and betrayed, but also, who are you at your best? Because that is amazingly motivating. And it's also incredible to be able to define that because it comes from a personal experience.
Absolutely.
So it's not as though you're making something up.
Absolutely. You know, we talk about what it feels like to be at your best. And we also just talked about how the music world is changing and how Ed Klorman was saying that the traditional paths of the orchestral musician solely or just the solo musician are changing. And when we talk about those things, there is sort of an unspoken assumption that in the times of uncertainty with your career, that you can think back to what you feel best doing and find ways to seek that out. Which leads me to my next point. So now that you've, you know, sort of established these things that you truly value, things that you hold very dear and that are important to you above all else, you know, I think a lot of us, we sit and we think about those things when we're stressed about our careers and when we're anxious. Then the next step is the action. How do we take action?
Right.
And so, you know, what advice do you have for people who are saying, okay, they're entertaining the idea that we can do something besides the traditional career paths? What's the action step? The first action step of many. I mean, there's so many things that you can do, but where's a great place to start?
Okay, so I'm a big believer that the first place to start is personal development, to know yourself, so know your values. And the second thing I advocate is knowing your strengths. I think that's equally important, to know what you're good at. And when you start examining yourself in terms of what's important to you and what you're good at, the next step is to do a little work on what do you really love doing. There are lots of different things one can do as a musician. You can be a soloist, you can be an ensemble player, you can teach, you can have a private studio, somebody can hire you to teach, you can form a new group, you can form the next Le Poisson Rouge. And it's up to you to figure out where do you want to put your passion. Because I think it's a combination of values, strengths, and passion. So I always advocate to people to get to know yourself a little bit before you set out to do a plan. Because if you make a plan and set goals without really knowing what's important to you, I think you set the wrong goals. So if you want action, the next step is to figure out, well, what do I want to accomplish? What are my goals? I'm a big believer in setting goals, but meaningful goals, motivating goals. And
Concrete.
Well, absolutely.
Absolutely,
you know?
yeah.
And I encourage people to dream about, well, what are you doing in 5 years? 10 years. Some people know. I mean, I've had students say to me, I see it, when I'm 50 years old, I'm conducting major symphony orchestras, or I'm first chair violin, or I've got my own group. And other people aren't quite so sure. Either way, I think goals can be very motivating, as long as, again, they tap into your values and your strengths. So set a goal and then break it down and make it, and that's the real action step, is a goal. For example, let's say you decide, well, in 5 years, I'd like to have my own ensemble. Or I'd like to start a group like the Tuxedo Revolt, Well, it's really important to put a timeline around that.
Absolutely.
Right? Because otherwise you can say, oh, I would like to start my own group. Well, great. When? Like posthumously? Do you want to be recognized for that?
Right, right.
Or in 5 years, 10 years, 3 months, whatever it is. And that is kind of motivating because it sets a timeline. And a lot of people are scared to put a time around when they want to accomplish something.
It does make you a little anxious at first because it does put a sense of accountability. I mean,
correct.
When I do these interviews and the writing for the blog, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's all planned out, and I know it's coming, and we have to work towards that deadline. And it is self-imposed, but it does lend a sense of urgency to what you're trying to do, and really does help you put those feet on the floor, rolling out of bed every morning, and say, I've got to do this now.
Correct.
So.
And I've got to do it. And why do you got to do it? Because it's really important to you.
Exactly.
That's motivating.
Right.
If somebody else is saying you better write that blog, you're not going to be as motivated.
Absolutely right.
So that's, I think, an important thing too. For many people, when you have a long-term goal, it's a little bit nebulous. So what I try to help people to do is to break those goals down and bring it into a time period where you can begin to experience success. So 5 years is great because you can dream and get all excited about some visionary, wonderful thing. And it might be a little scary to say 5 years. So what we do is we test it out. So I will ask people, great, so if you want to have your own ensemble in 5 years, where do you want to be in 3 years? And often that will start triggering, oh gee, if I want to start my own ensemble, that means I have to be, play well enough and I have to know people.
Right.
And we have to, get along. We have to give concerts. Okay, so in 3 years, if I want to start my own ensemble, I better know all the people that are going to be in there, and we have to start performing a little bit together. Great. Well, if that's your 3-year goal, what about a year from now? Well, I have to, I'm thinking I want to create a Pierre Lunaire ensemble. Okay, so let me say I need to identify 3 of the 6 within the next year. At least have an idea of who my three of my players are. And all of a sudden now it starts to be more concrete. And then you can build in a reality check to say, well, how realistic is it in a year to identify those people? Well, if you've been to a wonderful conservatory and you have a very close network of collaborators and friends, maybe that's not so hard.
Well, what you're talking about is is a skill that I use all the time, and I learned it from Astrid. And just be aware, when you first start, it's a little uncomfortable to working backwards from your end goal.
Yeah.
But you can work back and get smaller and more minute and smaller down to the minutia of, I must write this blog 500 words tomorrow,
Yes.
all the way up to, I want to write a book in 5 years. It is wonderful from experience. I can say that it's a really wonderful process to have, and to apply to all aspects of your life. It really does help streamline large multiple goals, because I often find that we don't just have one goal we're working on. We have several projects in different areas of our life, in your teaching, in your ensemble, in your individual performance, in your networking. So how do you manage all those at once?
Right. No, and that's a really good point. I think one of the basic trends for musicians is that musicians tend to do more than one thing. In fact, I think the data shows that most musicians are doing at least 2 to 3 different things and are deriving revenues from at least 3 different sources. So to me, that says a couple of things. Number one, it's necessity is the mother of invention. So you have to do a number of things in order to make it as a musician. But also, most musicians I know are very creatively, need a lot of different kinds of creative inspiration. So they like teaching, and they like performing, and they like having different ensembles. So I think it's both things. How do you manage this? Again, it's important to be able to set priorities, which is pretty tricky. And so, it starts with a definition of what's a priority. A priority is a short-term goal, and you get to set the priorities. And I think for a lot of people, if you realize that you're in charge of your goals and you're in charge of your priorities, you can change your priorities at any time. So if you're in school, that's probably a priority. First semester, that's going to take precedence over a lot of other things. Summer vacation, when you're at a festival or traveling or touring, that's a different set of priorities. Once you graduate from school and you're working, again, you look for different periods where things are more important. Perhaps you're working on a project that you're really, really excited about, and it's got a 2-month turnaround time. So you're going to be working very hard on that, and maybe other things have to go by the wayside a little bit.
Now, one of the things that a lot of the blog readers and viewers now who follow the Tuxedo Revolt is we envision a different way that the performing arts interact with our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And you've given us some great tools to be able to take our projects, and to implement them and to take them down to their movable parts and say, this is what this specific action does towards my goal.
Mm-hmm.
But in the broader sense, what do you advise for, I know that you work lots of times with musicians and other creative artists who come to you who may be blocked or maybe at a wall in their creative life. And I know that many people feel they have that next thing inside them they want to get out. Let's talk for a second about some strategies that you can use at home to sort of unblock and explore things that maybe you're sort of thinking of on the back burner.
Okay, that's a really, really powerful question and a very important question. And it starts with being very aware of what messages are going on in your head. Why are you blocked? That's a huge question. So I've noticed that a lot of artists are afraid. I'm not good enough, I did it before, but I don't think I can do it again. I had my one shot at glory and it's never going to happen again. And so these negative messages translate into some pretty, it affects the way you feel, because if you're thinking, oh, I'm never going to do this again, I'm not good enough, all my friends are getting ahead and I'm never going to make it. I mean, physically, you probably feel really scared and anxious, and emotionally you're feeling nervous and anxious, and it affects your behavior, because if you're really feeling like that, what are you going to be like at a rehearsal or at a performance?
Right.
What are you going to be like at a networking event? You know, it really affects your behavior.
Just day-to-day communication with other individuals, you know, opening yourself up.
Exactly. So it's really important to get to gain awareness around the messages you're giving yourself, and that's huge. You know, just being able to stop your mind and notice what your mind is telling you.
I think a lot of it is sometimes if you pay attention to the if I could just get this done, then I could do that. If I could just get enough money, if I could just work on this technique, and you start to wonder, you know, those things, to me, I found also become indicators when you start thinking about, well, why is that a problem?
Right.
And then you start sort of disarming them, and
right.
You know.
Well, I think that's, you know, if you're at the point where you can say, oh, well, that action is interfering with my ability to get ahead. Psh, 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 off I go. You're already way ahead of the game. I'm talking about the people that literally are blocked, who don't practice, or who practice day and night because they think they're not good enough and they're not getting themselves out there. So I say, and I've seen this work with students and with clients, what are those messages? And let's substitute a more healthy, positive message. And that's,
absolutely.
And that's where I help people with their, what I call their flow affirmation. You know, literally, what do you like at your best? And what are some words that can inspire you?
On the point of affirmations, I really have to jump in and say I fully agree with Astrid, because we live in a world as musicians that's sort of natively inclined to what we do, and to we face a lot of pushback from what we're trying to do, and especially trying to push new projects. And so I really can attest to and believe in what you're saying, that sometimes you have to be a cheerleader for yourself, and you have to push that message every single day until you really believe it yourself too. Right?
Put a Post-it note on your practice stand that says, I am, you know, powerful, connected, and charismatic. You know? And embody that. See what it's like. And take one action that says, I actually am that person. And often, it's literally sitting down to practice and saying, I am going to play really well. You know? The negative voice, you know, go away. Just, and that, you know, I'm a big believer that if you can find a small grain of success, you can start to build on that.
Absolutely, and that's so important when you're trying to launch a new project, something that's different. That I think it was Mark Twain who said, every genius is a crank until his idea is proven, you know.
Yeah.
And I think there is something to that just because it hasn't been done, or just because it's something people may not understand, doesn't mean it's not worth doing.